There is a dangerous killer loose, we believe. This killer, if he's still alive, will kill again. It's time to get on with that.
You worried for your other boy?
Yes, I'm worried.
Worried for neighbors?
I'm worried for this entire country. There is a killer walking around out there someplace. Lou Smith tells us that we
That's
can...
a detective, right?
Detective
Lou Smith is the
Smith,
only homicide investigator that's ever looked at this case.
and he says definitively that there is enough evidence to find this man. But the public needs to know it. It's been...
Why would the police not want to solve that?
Why wouldn't they?
Oh, I think the police are passionate.
That it's you?
They're passionate that it was one of us.
What's really interesting about this is that Larry actually opens the psychological door with a very general question, asking almost cryptically, worried about your other boy. So he has put that word out there, which is why I don't think it's improbable that Patsy stumbled on the same word before correcting herself to say man.
And he says definitively that there is enough evidence to find this.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most inauthentic voice in true crime. By the way, if you're one of those people who who sort of cringe every time I say most authentic voice, wouldn't you put up your hand right now? Don't feel shy. If you're one of those people who, whenever I introduce the channel and I say most authentic, do you feel a little bit uncomfortable? Don't be shy, put up your hand. I'll be dealing with that a little bit later, so stay tuned for that. Now, don't forget, I'll also be doing another brief crime news update later today. We'll look at some of the latest news coming in from day 3 of the Delphi trial. It's quite a big day today. Crime scene photos are likely to be shown to the jury. They're likely to be graphic. Now, as we continue this statement analysis of that fascinating and really compelling interview the Ramseys did with Larry King to promote their book, we'll look at additional aspects that I think are interesting, and also, now that we're almost halfway through the interview, it's quite interesting how and where Larry actually reveals his own bias in terms of this case. Before we get to that, if you're finding this analysis very cringeworthy, please don't subscribe. You can also hit the dislike button. And then also a quick note on a comment left on the previous video. Someone said, I cringe every time you call yourself the most authentic voice in true crime. Are you one of those people as well? Did you put up your hand earlier? Well, then this is directed towards you. Actually, someone left that comment in a book review several years ago, and I really liked it. Did you know that? So that was actually a comment left after reading a book, after someone had spent a lot of time, probably weeks, reading ongoing research, and then they left a review, quite a thoughtful review.
How are we supposed to know?
Yeah. Right. How are you supposed to know?
Well, if you've ever visited this channel and looked at the description of the channel, it reads, described by one reviewer as, quote, the most authentic voice in true crime. And that is what True Crime Rocket Science strives to be. Credible, meticulous research and thorough analysis of high-profile true crime cases. I'm sorry if that makes you cringe trying to do that, trying to achieve that. And I have to say, given how hard we worked on that video in particular, and given the standard of analysis in that episode specifically, I have to say I cringed when I read it. It's a pretty ironic comment given the fact in the video itself and in this video, I've actually been on the ground in Praia da Luz in Portugal, just as I've been in Boulder, Colorado, and where I live is nowhere near either of those settings. I've gone all the way to stand right in front of apartment 5A. I've stood right in front of the Ramsey house as well. That may not count for anything to you, Mr. or Mrs. Cringe, but it counts for a lot in my book. And I know it counts for a lot in terms of the friends, members, and patrons of this channel that have been supporters for years, some of whom I've actually met in person. In a few days, I'll be in Perugia, Italy, visiting the fabric of the Knox case. I suggest you don't follow coverage of that just in case it's too authentic for your authentic cringe threshold. I've also written multiple books about all three of those cases, Knox, McCann, and the Ramsey case. I suggest you don't read any of those books either, just in case that's too authentic for your authentic cringe threshold. I've also studied law. I've sat in murder trials from Cape Town to Austin, Texas.
What the fuck have you done lately?
So please spare me your armchair analysis. If validating yourself or your work makes someone else cringe, that seems to be because they consider either you or your work invalid. Really? Is it? Is my work invalid to you? Maybe there's a creator out there who works harder, who also writes books, who's better educated, and who provides more insightful analysis. If that's the case, you should really head there and stay there and take your cringing along with you. I mean, we want intelligent, sensible, sober folk here, don't we? Curious, critical thinkers with longer than average attention spans. And if you can't even recognize what this channel stands for, then how the heck are you supposed to ever figure out the truth, the reality of complex cases? Again, if you found what I've just said very cringeworthy, please don't hit the thanks button and don't listen any further. And now that we've gotten that out the way, let's get started. Right, number one, the investigation ended on December 26th. Well, I would say it ended on October 13th, 1999, but let's listen to the context in which this comes up.
We're back with the Ramseys. You almost immediately became suspects. Do you know why? Or the public perception of suspects?
Well,
was it because of the bathing, because of the...
No, I think the tragedy...
Way before that.
The tragedy of this investigation was it ended on December 26th. Linda Arndt, the lead detective that was there, went on national television a few months ago and said, I knew the father did it because I saw it in his eyes.
Now, you might say John Ramsey has a point with that Linda Arndt made a fool of herself, that she didn't know what she was talking about. But let's face it, the grand jury also found something to indict, or they certainly voted to indict, not on one but on two aspects. So Linda Arndt couldn't have been completely off track, could she? Linda Arndt is the favored pinata, but it was actually the district attorney who killed the case. And the only reason that's not part of the popular narrative today is because that too was very cynically and mischievously covered up as well. That is actually one of the craziest parts of the Ramsey case. Even with the entire America looking on, the man at the center of it still had the temerity to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. That's guile. That is similar guile to the ransom note itself. Number two, is that because they found no entrance into the house? So Larry is essentially saying, did you become suspects because they really didn't find any sign of forced entry? That wasn't very clear. And I think that is a very valid point. So how does John Ramsey defend himself against that really valid point, very interesting point?
It was the parents.
Is that because they found no entrance into the house?
We don't know why.
Well, we know, Larry, that a window was open.
Do you see how John gravitates to this particular aspect? It's the sort of biggest, most important piece of evidence to this idea that someone came from the outside and that it wasn't a family member who committed this crime. It's also interesting how Patsy offers the formulaic, we don't know. Is that because they found no entrance into the house? Patsy responds almost instinctively. She says, we don't know, almost reflexively, only to have John interrupt with what they do know. And what's their number one piece of evidence of forced entry? All together now.
Well, we know, Larry, that a window was open. Under that window was a suitcase, as if a step to get up through it.
I'm not actually sure it's true to say that the window was open. Actually, it was closed, and John himself said he closed it. It was open when the CSIs entered the house that night to photograph and record video of the house, especially the basement. Then number three, and I find this so ironic, Patsy says, there was a lot of evidence.
We have a lot of evidence.
No charges have been filed. I and my prosecution task force believe we do not have sufficient evidence.
There is a lot of evidence. The police that were there the morning of the 26th, taking evidence, have a lot of tangible evidence. They did a good job at collecting evidence. We have fibers, we have DNA, we have a lot of evidence.
Patsy, what about the ransom note and the handwriting of the ransom note? What about the high-tech shoe print? But to play devil's advocate, there is actually a lot of evidence to support the intruder theory. That is how Lou Smith kind of got his job. He made a whole kind of career, it went on for years, dealing with just the intruder theory. Not good evidence, but evidence nonetheless. This pales, obviously, in comparison to the alternative theory. Number 4, the police said you would only give interviews conditionally. How do the Ramseys respond to this?
Is that not true?
I don't remember.
You didn't give them any guidelines?
The only guideline I remember, the only request that we made, and this was after a huge gap of mistrust developed.
So John is asked, the police said you only give interviews conditionally. John then says, I don't remember, and he looks down.
Needed to be investigated.
The police
but they
say,
stopped there. They didn't
police
go
say
on.
that you would only, you put guidelines up to the interviews. You'd only be interviewed together. Why?
I don't remember.
Is that not true?
I don't remember.
You didn't give them any guidelines?
The only guideline I remember, the only request that we made, and this was after...
I actually remember several guidelines being put forward, and these were even published, as far as I can remember, in the Boulder Daily Camera. And it was several things. It was where they wanted to be interviewed, who they wanted to interview them, and it was also that they wanted to be interviewed together and for how long they wished to be interviewed. So number 5, Larry says, I'd answer any question. I'd cooperate in every way possible. It's at this point, almost halfway into the interview, that Larry finally reveals his bias. He finally plays that card, and it's hard to disagree with him.
Let me tell you what develops in this as a father and what other people say, and the reason that I think that you're under this cloud. Most people would say, if I didn't do it and my daughter was killed, I'm talking as a father, and I don't like to bring myself into it. 1, I'll answer any question. I'll take any test. I'll meet with you. I'll be there first thing in the morning. Catch the killer. I'd go nuts. I'd cooperate in every way. Fast. I'd go out with the cops. I'd give them my fingers. I'd give them my 5.
We did that.
Now, it's interesting when Larry says that and they say, we did that. Well, they haven't even apparently read the autopsy report in this interview. They say they haven't read it. And when Patsy tries to make the argument that they cooperated, she says, well, we stayed in Boulder, Colorado. We cooperated by not leaving Boulder, Colorado. Except they did.
We did do that.
We met with them on the
cooperated fully in every way.
26th. We met with them on the 27th. We gave hair, blood, fiber samples on the 28th. We left
do they say
to
you
Stayed
marry
in
our
Boulder,
daughter.
Colorado.
And that really is laughable. How many suspects in the history of investigations leave town in the middle of being investigated? But the Ramseys did exactly that. In fact, they wanted to leave that same day, but someone overheard the arrangements being made with the pilot, Mike Archuleta, and talked them out of it. I think it was Larry Mason. Also, if you're going to say what you did do, let's be clear on what you didn't do. You didn't talk to law enforcement for 4 months. Didn't allow them to interview you the way they felt as investigators was appropriate. Since when does a suspect dictate how he wants to be interviewed?
Why did they say you were uncooperative? Or some of them?
I don't know.
It's a great question from Larry. Why did they say you were uncooperative? John responds, I don't know. It's really a good interview from one end to the other from Larry. Do you know, anyone here know the answer to that mystery? Why did the police say they were uncooperative? Watch how John pivots from that to controlling the narrative. What we need to do here is, and then Larry also says, are you worried about your other boy?
They say you were uncooperative, or some of them.
I don't know. What we need to do is get down to the objective here. The objective is to find the killer. I can say a lot of things about what the police didn't do. They can say a lot of things about what we didn't do. But let's put that aside. Let's put politics aside. Let's put egos aside. There is a dangerous killer loose, we believe. This killer, if he's still alive, will kill again. It's time to get on with that.
You worried for your other boy?
Yes, I'm worried.
Worried for neighbors?
I'm worried for this entire country. There is a killer walking around out there someplace. Lou Smith tells us that we
That's
can...
a detective, right?
Detective
Lou Smith is the
Smith.
only homicide investigator that's ever looked at this case.
And he says definitively that there is enough evidence to find this man.
Is Patsy right? Is Patsy right that there's enough evidence to find this man? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.